I've done a couple of these looking back at classic Doctor Who episodes, and more or less in order, at least the ones that I have. And I thought, hey, let's do the same thing with Star Trek. Well, those are all complete and accessible. So, got to start with the beginning, and the original beginning that didn't air, because Star Trek had two pilots, which was unusual for its time. But word has it that Lucille Ball was cheerleading for the show and wanted to give it another chance. So the first pilot had a different cast, with the exception of Leonard Nimoy as Spock, and that was it. Everything else was different people. Majel Barrett is featured in it, but she's not playing Christine Chapel. She's playing the second officer there, number one. And the captain is not Captain Kirk, but Captain Christopher Pike, played by Jeffrey Hunter. And so they shot this one. And to some extent, you can kind of, for its time, you can see that some money was spent on this pilot episode, whereas later shows, not so much. Especially some of the matte paintings for the backgrounds seem to be a little better done. And there's that famous one where Pike has to fight this supposed giant guy, but well, he's a little bigger than he is, so I guess that works. But the sci-fi scenery in the background there, you don't see much of that later on in the original Star Trek, where you actually have another planet or a giant moon in the skyline and all that. But anyway, so this was where they were originally going to go with Captain Pike, and the Enterprise looks a little different. The bridge is a bit more Spartan in color. It's very drab and gray mostly, and the same with the uniforms. There's still a color code there, but there's the gold and the blue, and then sort of a tan color, but no red, very little red, which was so prominent in the series later. And other little details, these little monitor thingies that stick out of the chair and stuff. And so there you have it. And at the end of the first officer, I said second officer, I meant first officer, is a woman. And so there's things like that early on that was of some interest there. And Spock is there to be the alien, to show that, yes, this is a show where human beings interact with aliens, and it's just an everyday thing. And it was the whole point of the USS Enterprise was not United States ship, but United Space ship, see? And that was the deal. And Spock is not quite the Spock. Yeah, there's not a lot here, but there is a brief moment where you actually see him smile. And the idea of the Vulcans and the stoicism and the lack of emotion and all that sort of thing hadn't fully formed yet. And it kind of suggested that the sort of bland and emotionless character personality was actually in the form of number one, the female first officer there, played by Majel Barrett. And she's even referred to as a computer and all this sort of thing. And so I think they just sort of grafted that onto Spock when they changed it around for the second pilot, where he's clearly in that position, and it even explains that he doesn't have emotions. Of course, so we later learn, yes, he does. The Vulcans just have a culture where they suppress them. But anyway, so you have basically the Enterprise is flying through space, and they get a distress call. So there's an old ship that disappeared, and they go looking for it, and it's a trap. There's these aliens with butt heads. But here again, for its time, everybody talks about how cheap it looks and whatnot, but this is what they had at the time. And you can even see the little veins in the heads moving back and forth and this sort of thing. So they made some effort. On the other hand, once the trap is sprung, they go to the planet and they find the survivors of the crash, but it was all an illusion. The Telosians of the planet that they're on, the Telos, they had this ability to project these illusions into your brain, And so they did all of this, and turns out there was only one survivor, a woman, and they want her to mate with Captain Pike to create a new race to inherit their world. I'm not sure exactly where they were going with this, because it would still just be human beings on their planet as their race dies out. But, well, whatever. But Captain Pike awakes in the cage, hence the title, where he's basically in a zoo of other creatures that they had captured in the hopes that they could have some other alien creatures to succeed them on their planet. But we don't get much glimpse of the other creatures except for a red space ape and a chicken man. That's about it. So, okay, they didn't do a lot of stuff that was that impressive. But, for what for all the times and for what it was is what they could. You could, quite a few times, you can clearly see that the cave-like structure is mostly paper mache and all that. But whatever. So the power of the television is demonstrated when they keep using their phasers and trying to find a way into their underground domain, and they got a super phaser cannon, which you never see again. It's kind of bad. But the phasers actually look a lot different, and I think they actually refer to them as lasers. They don't even call them phasers, but the design of it looks very, very different, and they didn't quite have the design that people are familiar with yet. And there's quite a few things. The sound effects are a little different. The bridge sound effects are different. I think the bridge sound effects you'll later hear in the later episodes, like for the shuttlecraft and stuff like that. And the screen was a little different. And the transporter room, well, the transporter room is more or less the same, I guess. Little things different, a little darker in there. But the sound effects was very different. But the look of it was pretty similar. But an interesting thing here is that when they beamed down to go on these, as an away team, they would wear these jackets, and they were blue and stuff like that. And in the later show, they just didn't do it. In the movies, they would do stuff like that. In the motion picture, they had these yellow jackets they put on when they were. Well, they never really beamed down, but they opened the front door on the bridge and walked out onto the dish. Yeah, whatever. And then in the later ones in Wrath of Khan and stuff, so the idea would reoccur here. But when the next generation came along, they're back to just, we don't need a jacket. So, it's just little differences here and there. And probably they figured, we can save on the budget and not have to constantly stitch these jackets for them and everything. The meeting room looks a bit more elaborate in it. There's more design to it and everything, and that's all gone later on. But little things like that. And of course, Captain Pike, his personality and approach is very different than Captain Kirk, and in a lot of ways, looking back at it and how Captain Picard was presented initially with Next Generation, they're very similar in a lot of ways. Captain Pike is a very by-the-book guy. He's a very serious man. He's not quite like Kirk, who might crack a joke here and there and that kind of thing. He kind of loosens up when he's talking with the doctor in there, and you can see shades of how things will go with Kirk and McCoy. Here he is with his doctor and all that. Talking about what his future might be, because he's not in the best of moods as this show opens, because he had some disastrous mission before and all that sort of thing. But with Picard, he was a very serious man and a very strict and again by the book and whatnot, and he kind of had to grow from that, because one of the things was that he was very uncomfortable around children, and they would do episodes where he learned to be more fatherly towards children when it just wasn't a part of his life and not something he was thinking of pursuing. But with Wesley and all that, he changed. And but for Pike, and of course there was a recent new Star Trek show that had a version of Pike. That Pike, more or less was closer to Kirk's personality than what we got with Pike. But again, of course, we only have this one episode of Captain Pike, and plus he was kind of down in the dumps as it opens. So, so he goes through this experiment with the aliens, and he learns that they can't read hateful or aggressive thoughts and this sort of thing. So that's kind of the clue of how he manages to escape. They keep trying to get him to fall in love with Vina, the woman that they've got there. And there's all these different scenarios, and the famous one where she's painted green. She's one of the Green Orion women, and she's strutting around. And all that. And so then they figure, hey, if he's not interested in her, they'll just take two of the women from his ship. And so number one and this ensign girl, the redheaded girl, they bring her down. So now you've got three. You got a harem. Come on, buddy. Let's get some action going. It's like they want to watch a porno or something. And, he's still wanting to break out, So, and I guess if the show had gone on, they were suggesting that there was romantic feelings from number one and the redheaded girl for Captain Pike. If the show had gone forward, maybe they would have pursued that. Who knows? But he is able to outwit them because of his aggressive feelings and whatnot, and he's not falling for their illusions anymore. And he captures one, and they had phasers or lasers, what have you, with them. But they don't work. Well, they did work. It's a good thing they didn't shoot themselves with it. That would have shattered the illusion pretty quick. But it turns out they had shot a hole through the cage, and they could have left at any moment, but they just couldn't see it. So they come out, and it's pretty much the gig's up, and it's all over with. And the aliens realize they can't keep the humans there, and their plan is kind of stupid. I don't see how these people, unless they wanted to take the children and sort of, I don't know, in utero, mix their DNA with it or something. Who knows? But they didn't really get into those details. So they're going to escape. At one point, they were going to demand that Captain Pike stay, and they would let the women go. And then number one threatens to blow them all up with an overloaded phaser. And so they realize, we can't keep the humans. They'd rather die than live in captivity, and all this sort of a statement on freedom and liberty and all that. And so they're, okay, we can leave. But Vina can't. Why not? Because she's not really the Marilyn Monroe looking, sexy blonde. She's a badly damaged old woman, because she was the only survivor of the crash, but the Telosians had never seen a human before, and they put her back together, but they didn't quite know how to do that, and so she's kind of a mess, looking like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and, so Captain Pike's not hanging around. But they give her an illusion of Captain Pike to have fun with, and they restore her to her illusion body of being young and beautiful and all that. So there you go. Now, that's the end of the show. Apparently, they said they thought the plot was too cerebral. So, because of the idea of illusion and, which is better and all that sort of thing, I guess. And, a new pilot was ordered, but by then the deal, Jeffrey Hunter apparently wanted a raise, and they said, no, we can't do it. So they moved on. They were going to go for Jack Lord of Hawaii Five-0. And apparently he wanted too much money as well. So then they came down to William Shatner. And, look, it worked out a lot better. I don't know. Could the series have been as successful as it later became? It was never really successful at the time. It did 3 seasons and got canceled. But the phenomena that it became, would the Jeffrey Hunter series have achieved that? I don't know. There's not enough there in one episode to see the interactions and whatnot, I guess. But William Shatner's approach to it, and everybody makes fun of Shatner and whatnot, but everybody, it's just his Captain Kirk is perfect, and I think an improvement on the initial vision for Star Trek at that time. So I guess it all worked out. What would Jack Lord have done? Book him Spocko? I don't know. So all in all, an interesting show, an interesting look at what might have been. There's some neat things. Of course, but sometimes I end up kind of liking that bridge design than the one they ended up going with. Maybe because I think it looks more militaristic because it's rather Spartan in color scheme and whatnot. Also, there's an interesting scene where Spock is going over some files and stuff, and a lot about the idea about their depiction of the future and whatnot. All the computers are, they're bulky and they have switches and knobs and all that sort of stuff. And now you got, and these days it was touch screens and all that sort of thing. Well, they didn't foresee that. Well, there's a scene where Spock is operating the computer, but he simply waves his hand over like the panel or what have you. And they don't do it like that in the later show. The later show, they're, pushing buttons and whatnot, or just talking to it. But it's an interesting concept there that he could just wave his hand over it and it would know what to do. That was an interesting idea of a futuristic technology. Just a simple thing like that, but, it's pretty much missed. It's because they don't really go back to it later. Anyway, there you go. The actual first adventure of Star Trek with Captain Pike and Mr. Spock and the rest, who knows what happened to them. We don't know. I'm sure there were novels and comic books and everything, but beyond that, we don't know. The only other depiction of them was Pike in the movie, of course, which was an alternate timeline, and then Star Trek Discovery, which is another alternate timeline. So it doesn't count on that. And all we know about number one is she likes cheeseburgers. We still don't know much else about that crew at all. As for the nasty mansplainer in Star Trek Discovery who immediately got splattered and smeared on an asteroid, there was some online suggesting that he was based on this character who appeared in The Cage, but I guess that's just people kind of speculating and whatnot. But anyway, there you go, Star Trek The Cage. So an interesting look at it. And of course the footage was repurposed for the Star Trek episode, the only two-part episode, The Menagerie. So that's of interest too. And of course the footage of Pike or Vina having an illusion version of Pike, that footage is used that it's actually Vina and Pike going back to their little love nest, because Pike is seriously injured in the future, and they just said, they built him an illusion body as well and all that. So boy, it wouldn't have worked if you saw the original. But anyway, they spent a lot of money on it, so they figured, hey, let's get some use out of it, and so they did. All right, Star Trek The Cage. Thank you for watching and listening. Say, why not like and subscribe? And for those of you who have subscribed, thank you very much. I do appreciate it. And while you're here, hey, why don't you check out that link description below? That'll take you to my mini stores that have plenty of goodies for you.